Good morning, my friend. I'm Dr. Lee Warren, and I'm here with you on Mind Change Monday for some self-brain surgery. I'm really honored and excited to be bringing you a very special guest today. Dr. Joe Maroon is and without hyperbole, I'll say it this way, a world famous, widely regarded as one of the greatest neurosurgeons of his generation. Dr. Maroon was the chairman of the Department of Neurosurgery, the founder of the Department of Neurosurgery at Allegheny General Hospital in Pittsburgh. He's been at different times chairman and vice chairman of the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center's world famous neurosurgery program, trained with some of the world leaders, trained many of the world leaders in neurosurgery, widely published and highly regarded, former president of the Congress of Neurological Surgeons. Joe Maroon has had a internationally regarded career as one of the best neurosurgeons ever. Well, the reason he's with us today is because he started the program that trained me. And in the year that he started it, I was the very first resident that he chose to train in that program. So I was the first resident to come out of medical school and go in as a beginning first-year resident at Allegheny General way back in 1995. So I had the honor of being the very first resident selected and the very first resident to graduate after having received all of their training at Allegheny General. So great honor. And I'm a neurosurgeon today. I say without any doubt, I am the doctor that I am, the type of surgeon that I am. The good parts of my training came as the result of the influence and mind vision of Joe Maroon, hard work and labor of Joe and the incredible team of people around him that he assembled to train up young neurosurgeons. The other thing that Joe did, though, is he had an eye on developing our character and our thought processes and the way we looked at things. And he spent a lot of time with us. He took me aside personally and mentored me. And then years later, after my training was long complete, he continued to be involved in my life and we became friends. It's hard to imagine becoming friends with someone who is your mentor and your champion and your teacher and your trainer and your boss and your professor and all those things. But Joe's become a true friend. And he's had an incredible life, not just neurosurgery. He's the team doctor, the team neurosurgeon for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Pittsburgh Pirates, Pittsburgh Penguin, professional sports teams for 30 years or more, still highly involved with the Steelers. There was a period of time, he is a world-class Ironman triathlete. So the crazy people that swim in the ocean, bike 100 and so miles and run a whole marathon all on the same day. Some of us haven't done all that in our whole lifetime, but he does it on the same day. And he's completed numerous, as he talks about in this episode, numerous Ironmans. He's won them on different continents for his age group multiple times. And he was highly involved with a nutrition company called GNC. And if you used to go buy vitamins from GNC, there was a period of time when Dr. Maroon's face was on the bottle of many of the vitamins that they sold. He was a consultant for them. He's done consulting work for professional boxing and wrestling organizations. He was highly involved in the concussion program, impact program that's used in every high school, junior high, college, and professional team ever to test athletes for concussions before they allow them to continue to harm themselves with head injuries. He was the first doctor to retire an NFL player because of concussion. He's a world thought leader on head injuries in sports. So Joe's had this diverse and eclectic career. But I realize frequently when I'm operating that a lot of the things that I do and a lot of the ways that I think have to do with something that Joe Maroon taught me directly or a way to look at things that he taught me. And so not long ago, Lisa said, you know what? You should talk about Dr. Maroon. You should get Dr. Maroon back on the podcast. He was on the show way back in 2014, not long after we lost Mitch. And we had a great conversation back then. But Lisa said, hey, you should reach out to Joe and get him on the show because you've been talking a lot about legacy lately and remembering where you came from and those kinds of big ideas. And I realized that one of the things that's unique about Joe Maroon is he saw in his mind the value of surgeons using an operating microscope to perform surgery. And I had this sort of arrogant idea. I think a lot of neurosurgery trainees, we go to medical school and we get fascinated with brain surgery. We don't really think about spine surgery as being that important because, I mean, after all, orthopedic surgeons, some of them are allowed to do spine surgery. So we see the separation when we're young that brain surgery is the realm of neurosurgeons. Spine surgery is a common ground. But it turns out Joe had this vision of recognizing, okay, when we do spine surgery, we work on big nerves. I mean, your sciatic nerve and the nerves that come off of your spinal cord and the lower lumbar spine are orders of magnitude larger than the cranial nerves that we work on in brain surgery. And so Joe said, you know what? Why would you do spine surgery with loupes on, these little magnifying glasses that people wear on their eyes, when you could use spine surgery, which is much more common? There's probably 8 or 9 spine surgeries that are needed before every brain surgery that's needed based on demographics of those disease processes. So why don't we make our residents use the operating microscope on every case they do? So they become masters that's using the surgical microscope, so that then when they do brain surgery, the scope's not in their way, but it's an extension of their body. It's an extension of their skill set, and then become masters at using the scope to their advantage. And that turned into this thought process that dawned on me that really saved me, because I had this arrogant idea. I wanted to be a brain surgeon. I didn't care too much about spine surgery. Spine surgery was more labor intensive, and I just didn't like it when I was a trainee. And Joe said, you know what? If you go into private practice or you do general neurosurgery, 80% of your work for your whole career is going to be spine surgery. You're going to relieve pain and restore function and help people and improve their quality of life. But you also can use spine surgery as a way to master the handling of nerves delicately. And you can learn to see it in a minimally invasive way and use the microscope to become a true master of microsurgery. And what you're going to find is that your spine surgery outcomes are vastly better than those of corresponding surgeons, orthopedic surgeons, or neurosurgeons who don't use the microscope. Because when they can't see as well, when it's not as well lit or well magnified, they're going to retract and pull on nerves more. They're going to have more concussive force on the nerves. They're going to do more damage to the muscles. And you're going to see over the course of your life that using the microscope and thinking of every case as an opportunity to practice microsurgery and being less invasive, you're going to see that pay dividends in your outcomes. And what I didn't know then, even though I thought it was irritating, is that it turned out to be true. Now, every time I do an operation, I think of how can I be the least invasive, least harmful, most delicate, and how can I use this to practice for the next time when I have a case that's even more difficult? How can I use this case in front of me, this particular patient and their issue? How can I try to maximize their outcome and minimize the impact and the imprint and the footprint of my having been there? And I began to see the nervous system as holy ground. And I began to see things with the microscope that I could never see before, little subtle pulsations, little places where a vein has a nerve tethered. And if I release that tether, then the patient will move better and feel better. And it's turned into this incredible, vastly better outcome than I ever imagined for most of my patients. And so if you have the experience of me being your actual doctor, you have Dr. Joe Maroon to thank for a lot of the ways that I take care of you. And so that led to a generation and now common idea that all neurosurgeons are masters of microsurgery and handling using the operating microscope. And now I've got 3D robotics, fancy technology microscopes. We were the first ones in the world here in North Platte, Nebraska, to have the Esculap AOS 3D robotic microscope. And that interest that I've had in always trying to stay on the leading edge of surgical microscopy is the result of Joe Maroon. So I didn't mean to go into a deep dive on the nerd side of neurosurgery. I just want to tell you, there's somebody in your life whose shoulders you're standing on when you do the things that you do. It's somebody, you may not even know who they are, but there's somebody ahead of you in history and in your life that did things and saw things and thought of things and developed things. And that's one of the ways that you can make this switch in your hippocampus from being anxious and stressed and struggling with this. Why is everything so hard? And why does my life always feel this way? And why does it always work out this way for me? You can make that switch and say, you know what? I'm so grateful that somebody came along before me. And I'm not having to literally dig a hole in the ground every time I need to go find water. Like somebody thought of wells and somebody thought of sewage and somebody thought of electricity and all the things that I have that I take for granted. Somebody thought of quantum physics, and that's why I have a cell phone or a smartphone that I can use to listen to a podcast. Like there's always some way, no matter what you're facing, to find a way to look at this situation and see the shoulders you're standing on, see the reasons to be grateful for something. And that little switch, even though it doesn't immediately resolve the issue that you're frustrated with, it switches you from hippocampus to frontal lobe instead of hippocampus to amygdala. And you get out of that fight, flight, freeze, anger, stress, depression, anxiety mode, and you go up towards executive thinking, improving your neurochemistry, reducing cortisol, improving the quality of your life. And Joe Maroon is one of those giants on whose shoulders I stand. So we had a wide-ranging conversation. We talk about faith. We talk about hardship. We talk about struggle. We talk about his career. We talk about his impact on me and my life. And I just want you to see this as not just two old friends having a conversation, but two people talking about an important, critically important concept. And that is that whatever you're doing in your life, you didn't get here by yourself. You're made of everybody that came before you. So even if there's some scoundrels or some people in your past that didn't do things right by you, you can find some way to be grateful for something around that life, or at least the way that it got you to where you are now. And so, my friend, I always tell you that you have to change your life by changing your mind. You can't get your life better until you get your mind better. And Joe Maroon helped me do that, starting way back when I was just a greenhorn kid coming out of Oklahoma to Pittsburgh to learn how to be a brain surgeon. And what I didn't know was that I was really going to become a master of spinal microsurgery, and that would be what I spent the bulk of my time doing in my life. And so the tens of thousands of people that I've been able to help in my life with my hands, all of them owe a thank you and a tip of the hat to Joe Maroon and the many others that he put around me as my mentors and trainers as I became a real life neurosurgeon and not just one that you listen to on the internet every day. We're going to have a great talk with Joe Maroon today. And before we do, I have a question for you. Hey, are you ready to change your life? If the answer is yes, there's only one rule. You have to change your mind first. And my friend, there's a place where the neuroscience of how your mind works smashes together with faith, and everything starts to make sense. Are you ready to change your life? Well, this is the place, Self Brain Surgery School. I'm Dr. Lee Warren, and this is where we go deep into how we're wired, take control of our thinking, and find real hope. This is where we learn to become healthier, feel better, and be happier. This is where we leave the past behind and transform our minds. This is where we start today. Are you ready? This is your podcast. This is your place. This is your time, my friend. Let's get after it. Well, friend, we're back, and I am so honored and excited to be reintroducing you today to an old friend and incredibly important figure in my life. I've got Dr. Joe Maroon with us today from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Maroon.
Thanks so much, Lee. Great to be with you again.
It's good to see your face. It looks like you get younger every time I see you.
I wish.
But Dr. Maroon, before we get started, and I'm going to call you Joe. You've told me over the years, call me Joe. It's hard for me to do, but I'm going to call you Joe today. And would you start us off with a word of prayer here this morning?
Yeah, dear Lord, give us the thank you for the grace you've given us to reconnect with my good friend and student Lee. Keep us healthy, keep us safe, and let us continue to share our word with those who would like to receive it. Through your help. Amen.
Amen. Well, Joe, I don't know if the listeners have heard this story before. It's been a long time since you were on the show. I think 7 or 8 years or longer. But the reason I'm a neurosurgeon today is because you started a new program in Pittsburgh, and I was your first resident that you chose in Allegheny General. Tell the story of how you came to start a residency training program.
Well, I was I came to Pittsburgh, to the University of Pittsburgh, and I was with Dr. Peter Janetta, one of the foremost neurosurgeons at the time. And after 12 years, I was invited to start the Department of Neurosurgery at Allegheny Health Network, another hospital here in the city of Pittsburgh. And we had such a large volume of patients, and I thought educationally it would be very beneficial to have neurosurgical residents. So we literally applied and was accepted and started the program. And at the time, I think it was 6 years, Lee, or was it, how long was it? 5 or 6? 6? A 6-year program. So we were looking to recruit individuals of the highest caliber to join the program and to be mentored by some very talented neurosurgeons we recruited. And we had, as we do now, there's many applicants for neurosurgical spots. At the University of Pittsburgh now, we have over 300 applicants for 4 spots a year. And 28 residents, Lee. We have 28 neurosurgical residents at Pitt now.
Wow.
But we started with 2 or 1 with you. I'm not sure. Maybe
1.
It was you.
Just 1.
So we had many applications for the program. And in looking over applications, we look at productivity as a student, character, work ethic, letters of recommendation. And to this late day, I'm still proud to say, Lee, that you rose to the very top of the list, and it was our great pleasure to work with you.
Wow. Well, it was an honor to be chosen. I was a left-handed kid from Oklahoma, and I had no idea that you were going to say yes to me. And I just am so thrilled still to think back to that time as a medical student, to have received that letter with your signature on it, Jack Wilberger's signature on it, to say, hey, you're going to be our first resident. And so here we are, coming on 30 years later. That was 29 years ago that I got that letter, believe it or not. And here 30 years later, I've done, tens of thousands of operations on 3 continents, and all because you said, hey, we want to train you. So I'm just so grateful, Joe, to have had that opportunity to train under you.
Well, God works in strange ways, as the cliche goes, and so many things of our lives, and I don't like to say get older, Lee, but I say mature. As I mature, I see how dots get connected in our lives and how things happen completely we have no control over. The small determining factors of human existence and how we end up, and how you and I 30 years later are now on a Zoom call discussing not only the past but also the present and future, and the struggles that we all have been through, the adversities that we've experienced and fortunately been able to overcome, and how our faith becomes stronger with adversity, and more humble as we get older.
That's right. I was thinking the other day about this notion that when I was coming up as a scientist, the research that I had done before I got to Pittsburgh, which had a lot to do with why you chose me, and then working around a lot of neurosurgeons, there was a lot of people who were sort of hardcore materialists, and people who may not have thought much of faith or believed in God or any of that. But you created an environment really for training where it was okay to be who you were. You said, hey, it's okay to have faith. It's okay to be the kind of person that you are. And we want to train you to be a good surgeon and believe what you believe, and live out your faith and live out your worldview. You never discouraged that. And I think it was a welcoming environment, and not all places were that way. So it was kind of a good piece of your character, I think, to allow people to grow up and show up and be who they were.
Well, thank you, Lee. And honestly, I can't tell you how proud I am of the work that you've done, who you've evolved to become, and the thousands of patients that you've touched and helped in so many ways, and the messages that you're very unique. I've been in this business for 50 years now as a neurosurgeon. It's hard to believe that, but when I look back of all the probably 100 or so or more residents, again, and I'm not blowing smoke, but the way you've reached out because of your own difficult experiences and translated that into books, into podcasts, into lectures, the way you've helped people is not just with your hands. The French word for surgery is chirurgie. Right. Hands, work with your hands. But there's a saying that laborers are individuals who work with their hands.
Right.
Craftsmen are individuals who work with their hands and their head. Artists are those who work with their hands, their head, and their heart.
Yeah.
And Lee, you're a true artist because you do this podcast. It's out of your heart and your brain that we're discussing this, and hopefully there can be a message or two that will relate with others that may help them in a time of need or a time of trouble. And God only knows that the world we're in, the stuff we're seeing daily at our universities, and the riots, the protests, the anti-Semitism that we're seeing now, we need a higher power. We need faith. We need good works. We need gratitude for the gifts we've been given. I right 2 blocks from me is a veterans hospital. Hundreds of patients there, veterans, and I've taken care of, like you. I've taken care of hundreds of veterans with PTSD, with amputations. And if you want a humbling experience, visit Walter Reed Hospital, the amputee section, where you see individuals with their arms, their legs. There was one individual, no arms and no legs. And then not to mention the mental issues, the devastating PTSD that completely destroys their lives and individuals. And then to see the horrible burning of flags and the kinds of protests that are going on now, no appreciation of history, no appreciation of the freedom that these young individuals have and how it was earned and bought by blood, sweat, and tears of the people who have gone before them. So anyway, I'm getting a little carried away. Excuse me.
No, I love it. I recently had a conversation with Ben Carson about these very similar things. Dr. Carson has a new... what's that?
I mean, you've been there. You've taken care of the same people. You've seen the broken, not only broken bodies, but broken brains.
That's right. Dr. Carson has a new book coming out called The Perilous Fight, and it's about how we get back to the notion that family and faith and those big things like that are what made America great in the first place. And it's really a great conversation with another brain surgeon.
Yep, I know Ben, and I just utmost respect for how he's maintained his principles and his character, despite, again, an awful lot of criticism and adversity.
That's right. Now, speaking of adversity, you tangentially mentioned it a moment ago, but how do you've walked through some big things in your life, and we told this story before the last time you were on the show about how when your father passed, you were kind of thrown into a part and a place in your life that you weren't expecting. Maybe tell a little bit of that story and how you navigated through that, and that's how you found your way to running and maybe found your way back to faith and ironically, maybe to some of your success as a neurosurgeon.
No question about it. Completely changed my life, Lee. As well, initially when I came to Pittsburgh, I finished my residency at the University of Indiana and Oxford University, Georgetown, University of Vermont. Came here and worked. I was very dedicated to be a very successful neurosurgeon, and I was. I had all the amulets of success. I had a good title and a position, enough money to live on, and doing good research. And then in the course of a week, my father died of a massive heart attack at age 60. My family broke up because I was so successfully. I had all the amulets of success, but I wasn't successful in my marriage and in my home. And those two things happened the same week, and I had to quit neurosurgery. So one day I was chief of neurosurgery in this hospital that I'm talking to you from right now. The next week, because of depression and success, I moved into a farmhouse in Wheeling, West Virginia, 60 miles from here. My father bequeathed to my mother a dilapidated truck stop that was heavily mortgaged, and we had to pay off the mortgage. And one day I was doing awake brain surgery on patients with tumors in eloquent parts of their brain. The next week, I was literally flipping hamburgers and filling up 18-wheelers in a truck stop, wondering, how did this happen? Well, It happened because I was totally unaware and unmindful of what the pursuit of success could lead to if it's not accompanied by a balanced square, which is the title of my book, Square One, A Simple Guide to a Balanced Life. My spiritual, so very quickly, anyone listen to this, draw a square. And at the top of the square, put work, family, spiritual, and physical.
Yeah.
Now draw a square somewhat with how much effort you put on each one of these. My work line was this flat line EKG. There was no family, there was no spirituality, and no physical. And the banker one day called me and said, Joe, I think he wanted to see if I'd be around long enough to pay off the mortgage. He said, we need to go for a run. And I found a pair of scrubs and tennis shoes and went down to the high school track, went around 4 times and said, never again. Totally exhausted. But that night was the first night I slept in about 4 months. So I went back the next day and I did 1.5 miles, then 2, then 3, and then I was like Forrest Gump running through Wheeling, West Virginia. They said, there he goes. And I read about triathlons, cross-training, learned to swim, got a bike, entered in a small sprint triathlon. Subsequently, over the course of the next several years, build up to 8 Ironman distance triathlons,
Wow.
which is 2.4 miles swim, 112-mile bike, and a marathon. And but what I'm not being boastful because it's what I do to save my life. As you know, Lee, the brain can make the body very sick. Depression, anxiety, fear causes heart attacks, irritable bowel syndrome, and ulcers. What's so critical to realize is that the body can heal the brain. And what happened to me, by running around that track and biking and swimming, I was resetting my neurotransmitters.
Yeah.
I was reconstituting my serotonin without drugs, my cannabinoid system, my dopamine, so that I subsequently got back on a healthy diet. And diet, exercise, avoiding environmental toxins like drugs, alcohol, and then controlling stress. So what's the best way to control stress? Your book on hope is so powerful. And if you look at the areas of the world where they have the most centenarians, the people who live greater than 100, what's their secret? Well, one of the secrets, besides diet, exercise, and avoiding environmental toxins, are strong family units.
That's right.
And prayer and spirituality. Why is that important? Because it reduces stress. What happens with stress, as you so eloquently describe in your work and podcasts, it reduces cortisol, the stress hormone that's neurotoxic to the human brain. It literally destroys the cells in the hippocampus that subserve memory. So, by a strong family unit, it reduces the cortisol, resets your neurotransmitters, and enables you to get back in homeostasis or balance. So, prayer, faith, is a key part of health. It's like diet, it's like avoiding toxins, it's like exercise. Faith is one of those qualities that permeates everything else we do.
That's right.
So, and again, I come back to your work, Lee. Of all you're a unique neurosurgeon, my friend, and you know that. But your books, called out your experience in Iraq. It's so heart-wrenching what you've experienced, what your eyes have seen, what your hands have experienced. and what your heart has felt. You've walked the walk and talked the talk. I mean, you do it, and I'm so proud for you and of you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I was thinking the other day about this concept of how do we get to the place that we are in our life. And I'll go back in a minute to the difference between mind and brain, and I want to pick your brain about those things. But I was thinking about this the other day because I remembered a case. I don't think I ever told you this story. The very first surgery that I performed as an attending neurosurgeon. I graduated my training program at Allegheny in 2001 in June, and then had to do a little bit of military training, and I ended up at Wilford Hall Air Force Medical Center in San Antonio August 1st of 2001. So this was a month before 9/11, right? So I show up as an attending neurosurgeon, and I walk in and I'm looking for the chief of neurosurgery, whose name is David Garrett. And I was told that there was another neurosurgeon coming out of training at NYU. Turned out to be a guy named Mike Leonard. But he was on vacation for 2 weeks, so it was going to be me and Dr. Garrett. So I walked into the neurosurgery clinic, and I found Dr. Garrett, and he saw me, introduced himself to me, handed me his beeper, and went on vacation. So he was gone. So I was by myself in a 1,200-bed level 1 trauma center as a first-day neurosurgeon. And Joe, 5 minutes later, the pager went off, and it was the ER, and it was a 3-year-old little boy with blown pupils and had a posterior fossa mass, a big tumor in his cerebellum, and he was herniating. And both of his parents worked in the hospital. So my first day, I was dealing with a pediatric brain tumor emergency, and I called John Maceros. Do you remember John? So John Maceros is a pediatric neurosurgeon that you brought to Pittsburgh. And John trained me in handling pediatric brain tumors. And so while they were preparing this child for surgery, I called John and said, I don't know what to do. And he said, yes, you do. He said, yes, you do. You know how to handle intracranial pressure. You know how to put a drain in and relieve emergency pressure. You know how to get the child positioned safely. And you know how to administer mannitol and reduce intracranial pressure, and you know how to resect this tumor. It's going to be a polycytic astrocytoma, and you know what to do. And he just reminded me that he had trained me, and you had trained me, and Jack Wilberger and Parvis Bagai and all these guys had prepared me for that moment. And so I performed the surgery, and the kid did great, and it was, a resectable tumor, and he did fine. But I was able to navigate that moment because I was standing on John Maceros' shoulders and your shoulders, and I was finding myself not having to rise to some occasion of being somebody that I wasn't, but able to fall back to the training I had been given and the preparation that I'd spent the previous 6 years in Pittsburgh doing. So maybe talk for a minute about this idea that we are the people and the training and the moments that came before us, because I recognize that my career is built on your career and your career is built on somebody else's. And neurosurgery is only about 100 years old, so it doesn't take that far back to get to Harvey Cushing, right?
No, that's exactly right. It stimulates in the book or in the poem Ulysses. The author writes, I'm a part of all that I have met. Yeah. And when we really think about that, it really begins in utero with the connection with our mother. Yep. I mean, we know that mothers who, say, abuse alcohol or drugs, the baby is affected negatively in utero from the mother. So we're part of all we've met beginning very early on. If there's healthy nutrition and exercise, it helps our brain as we're forming and developing. But after that, we talk about epigenetic factors. Those we're all familiar with genetics. We have the same genes and this and that from our mother and father. Epigenetics is that science, 20, 30 years old now, that reflects the environmental factors and how they affect our brain, meaning the individuals that we meet early on in our lives, how we're nurtured, the examples we see, the lessons we learned early on in those first 5 to 10 years that get wired into our brain. And as you, so again, I love watching you and listening to your podcast. You talk about the connectome, which is the wiring diagram of the brain, and how, I'm going to take a tangent about Heraclitus, a Greek philosopher, who 2,500 years ago said, you can never put your foot into the same river twice. Think about that. Why can't you put your foot into the same river twice? Because the river is constantly flowing. It's a different river every second, virtually. Our brains, that's the definition of neuroplasticity. The olfactory, visual, auditory, sensory, gustatory sensations that are going by the cranial nerves into our cerebral cortex is constantly making new synaptic connections on a second by second basis. So those people listening to this podcast are going to be different in their brains when this is finished. They're going to have new synaptic connections. And so as we're maturing, those synaptic connections get hardwired, so to speak, until about age 25, plus or minus, when the brain is then fully developed. But what happens to the adolescent? The adolescent who smokes marijuana that has now been legalized in 33 states and nationally as of a couple days ago, what does marijuana do to the adolescent brain? It messes it up. That's right. It predisposes the connections to addiction, to psychosis, to manic depression. So, people say, well, it's like alcohol. Well, alcohol is neurotoxic also.
Yeah.
But it's marijuana to the adolescent brain is so bad and so harmful. And we know 1 out of 4 kids in high school today will be smoking marijuana.
Yeah.
And 4 to 5 times this month. It's epidemic. It's now euphemistically referred to as self-medication.
Yeah.
But the point is, Lee, you're standing on the shoulders. So much of what we are and who we are is acquired non-consciously, non-voluntarily. It's living. It's the experiences we have, the good, the bad, the ugly, that molds our brain. And as you so eloquently discuss in Frontal Lobe Friday, what's happened in our frontal lobes? What do? They control impulsivity, planning, and our memory, our judgment, decision making. All of these things are in the frontal lobes. And as you say, how do you rewire this once it does get hardwired? It ain't easy. It ain't easy. Shakespeare in Macbeth had a great quote. After they killed King Duncan and the blood was on the hands of Lady Macbeth, and she said, out damn spot, out damn spot. Well, Macbeth went to the physician because his wife suffered from a severe PTSD because of the murder that was committed. And he asked the doctor, he said, "Doctor, how does one pluck from memory some rooted sorrow, erase the written troubles of the mind, and with some sweet oblivious antidote, cleanse the bosom of that perilous stuff that weighs so heavy upon the heart?"
Wow.
And the doctor looked at Macbeth and said, "In this, the patient must minister to himself or herself." And
wow.
What you do, Lee, is you give all of us who are patients, suggestions and tools to minister to ourselves with the help of a higher power.
That's right.
You cannot do it alone.
That's right.
Won't work.
That's right. I was reading a book recently about art, and there's a guy named Russ Ramsey wrote a book, Rembrandt is in the Wind. And it was talking about a Dutch painter named Vermeer. I don't know if you're familiar with Vermeer's work, but when you look at a Vermeer painting, the something kind of unsettling happens because the color and the detail are so intense compared to other artists of his era. And Ramsey was describing how they finally figured out what Vermeer did was he used the first version of a device called a camera obscura, which basically was like a projector which could project onto the canvas an image that he could then paint in greater detail with. And it turned out that his next door neighbor was Anton von Leeuwenhoek, who was the guy that invented the microscope, right? And so Leeuwenhoek made him this device to help him be a better painter. So you've got Vermeer, this great Dutch artist, benefiting from a guy who was into optics and studying cameras and lenses and all of that. And when I read that, I thought, Joe Maroon insisted that we used a microscope in the operating room for even simple procedures. Like you said, you guys need to learn how to be master utilitarians of the operating microscope. So it'll help you be better spine surgeons, and that'll help you be better brain surgeons. And so I thought, gosh, we were the beneficiaries of Van Leeuwenhoek all those years, centuries later, on a different path than Vermeer was. But isn't that fascinating?
Well, it is, Lee, and it takes me back to when I finished my residency. I never used it. A microscope wasn't even being used, but Dr. R.M. Pearden Donahue was the chair at the University of Vermont, and I met him at a neurosurgical meeting at Colby College, and he offered me a fellowship after finishing 6 years of neurosurgery to take another year, 6 months, to go to his lab and learn how to use a microscope to do minimally invasive surgery. Changed my life. And Dr. Gazi Yassergil, who is known as the neurosurgeon of the century,
right,
was a teacher of mine and learned in Donahue's lab. So when I came to the University of Pittsburgh and then subsequently Allegheny, I was carrying on that same tradition of Donahue, Yassergil, Janetta, Lee Warren.
That's right. That's exactly what I was going to get at here today. Like we learned from those who came before us, and we don't even know sometimes the people that were influential in that. Like von Leeuwenhoek, all the way back there in the Netherlands, hundreds of years ago, doing that work resulted in us being able to be better brain surgeons.
That's exactly right. What we do today. Huge.
Fascinating.
Great.
It's really interesting to me. And here's a little pivot, but I've been reading a lot, Joe, about this sort of mind-brain problem. We're brain surgeons, and we deal with the brain all the time. And we recognize, though, I think good neurosurgeons at some point recognize that there's a difference between the mind and the structure of the brain. And as I was doing all this research and reading about this, preparing my next book, which is going to be called The Handbook of Self-Brain Surgery, by the way. But the self-brain surgery book is about neuroplasticity, right? And how you can direct what happens in your brain structurally by the things that you think about. And to my shock and fascination, I found one of the first really impactful writings about the mind and the brain being separate came from a neurosurgeon named Wilder Penfield, who you probably met. Did you ever meet Dr. Penfield?
No, but I did meet, in fact, one of his proteges gave me my boards, but I certainly knew of Penfield very well.
Wow. And he wrote a little book called The Mystery of the Mind.
Patient and stimulated their brain who had epilepsy to see and major contributions in neuroanatomy, no question.
That's right. And what Penfield realized is when he had people anesthetized and when he were awake and doing craniotomies, he would stimulate the motor cortex where they could not move, and then he would ask them later what they were thinking about when they couldn't move, and they recognized that there was a difference between the will that they had to do something and the ability that they had to do it. So they had intention and desire and drive, mental processes that wanted to do certain things that were not just about their physiology and the mechanics of whether or not they could move. And that's when Penfield realized that mind and brain are not the same thing. It was fascinating.
Well, it is. And what you alluded to something earlier, Lee, that simulated Proverbs. I think it was Proverbs 14. I'm not sure. But as a man thinketh, so he shall be.
Yep.
Profound statement, 3,000 years BC.
That's right.
And as a man thinketh, so he shall be. Our thoughts are literally converted into who we are and what we are. Our thoughts can cause heart attacks, irritable bowel syndrome. It can cause anxiety, depression, and all the mental diseases that can occur. And it's that struggle. How do we control our minds? How do we control our thoughts in a positive way? And it's a philosophical struggle that goes back as far back as we can think, from the African savannah.
That's right. All the way back. So let's pivot for just a few minutes we have left here, Joe. I promised you about 45 minutes. We're getting close to it. But you like me, have faced significant hardship and strife in your life. And there's been some moments that were devastating to you. So give us, for the person out there who may be going through something like that now, like what is Joe Maroon, not only an accomplished world-renowned brain surgeon, but also almost professional athlete and world thought leader, but also a dad and a husband and a father, grandfather. How do you advise people to handle major adversity and land on hope?
And land on hope. Well, I think, Lee, it's a deep question. First of all, honest to God, I swear I'm telling you the truth. A friend of mine is in need, and I sent the individual a copy of your book.
Well, thank you.
On hope, which that's the first thing I would recommend to people. Read this book. But I think it's usually when things happen, a death of a child, a death of a parent, firing from a job, it's a very humbling experience. Where we realize, like they say, there's no atheist in a foxhole.
Yeah.
And the things that seem important to us, we get back to the very basics. And when you start thinking of the very basics, you think of, again, I think of a higher power, faith, God. Who else do you reach out to?
Yeah.
There are three most important things in life. I've given a lot of thought to this. Number one is mental and physical health.
Yeah.
Number two is relationships with God, family, friends, and colleagues like you. Number three is carpe diem. Seize the day. We know not the day nor the hour when we will be called.
That's right.
And be aware. In Pittsburgh, it's a beautiful sunshiny day now, unlike the usual cloudy days that you were used to and accustomed to.
Yeah.
But it's carpe diem. Seize the day, and don't be hesitant to reach out to family, friends, and God not only when you're hurting, but also when things are good. The so-called attitude of gratitude.
Right.
We've been given so much. We've been blessed with so many good things in terms of our health, our families, and jobs, and work, and food, and a great country. The Buddhists talk about mindfulness and awareness, being aware of what you're going through. Be mindful of where your mind is and the level of tension or stress in your body. Every day when I get in my car, I look at my tachometer.
Yeah.
And as you know, there's a red zone in your tachometer when your engine's overheating. It's very important to be mindful of when your own engine is overheating by stress, by anxiety, by the cares of the world, and then take those steps to decrease the RPMs, to decrease the stress, and and look towards your square. You know, if it's all work, think about working out your physicality. Think about your diet. And spirituality. Spirituality, for me, infuses all areas of what we do.
That's right.
Lee, I took care of Father Ephraim, who was head of the Greek church here for monasteries. Give me 1 second. 1 second. And I actually operated on him for a spinal condition, was able to help him. And he gave me this prayer rope.
Wow.
Many years ago.
Beautiful.
There's a beautiful hand-woven prayer rope that I literally wear in surgery.
Wow.
Under my scrubs. And since meeting him and talking to him and kind of having him as a spiritual father, what is the most anxious time of a patient's life? It's when
right before
they're
surgery.
in your recovery, or they're in your waiting area, your holding area, waiting to be wheeled into the operating room to have their brain or spine operated upon. So what do you think their adrenaline level, their cortisol level is? It's sky high.
Yeah.
So what I'll do, and I don't try to convert anybody, but I say, would you like to say a little, do you believe in a higher power? And would you like to say a prayer? 90% of patients say yes.
That's right.
I always reach down, take their hand, and touch them. Touch is healing. And then I'll have them touch this prayer rope. And I'll say, do you mind if I say a little prayer? No problems. Today is the day the Lord hath made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. And with your help, get Mary or John back to their home and their family. How long did that take me? 5 seconds?
Yeah.
10 seconds? I get more thank you notes for taking that time to say a prayer and connect with the patient at a spiritual and physical level than anything else. Thank you for taking the time to say a little prayer with me. So what happens? It's documented. The average length of stay goes down, the incidence of infections is less, and the healing power is better.
That's right.
Because the cortisol is as a physiological basis for all of those things.
That's right.
That's what I relate to people.
Amen. Well, friend, Joe Maroon is a legend, and I say that without hyperbole, a legend in neurosurgery. And if you have had the fortune or misfortune, hopefully fortune, of having been one of my patients in real life, that is built on the back of Joe Maroon, the legacy of him, and 1,000 conversations like the one that you've heard us had today. I remember rounding in Pittsburgh hundreds of times, and you would say things like that. Sit at the bedside, take a second, sit down, put your hand on people, talk to them, break down that barrier between doctor and patient, and get on the same level with them. And all those things that I do every day in my practice and on this podcast and the writings that I do, they're all built on the shoulders of Joe Maroon. So Joe, thank you so much for not only training me and accepting me, inviting me into this incredible profession, but being my friend and for the last 10 years or so, really coming alongside me as a friend and not just a professor. I love you, and I'm so thankful for you and proud of you, and thank you for the time that you've spent with us today.
Lee, I'm so proud of your work and you, and it's really an honor to be with you again, talking with you, and again, keep up your phenomenal work.
Yes, sir. God bless you, Joe. Thank you.
Okay. Bye now.
Wasn't that incredible? Joe Maroon, one of the giants on whose shoulders I stand, and you've got them too, friend. So just take a moment today to find a way to be grateful, to switch whatever you're going through from frustration to gratitude. That'll change your mindset. It will change your life. It will help you to reframe whatever experience you're in. Remember, the quantum physicists have taught us that the way we pay attention to things and the things we choose to pay attention to become more real over time. And so if you're frustrated, if you're sad, sick, stressed, stuck, or out of options in some way, start looking at your situation from a different perspective. Change the position, like I did, from thinking about spine surgery as boring stuff that they allow orthopedic surgeons to do, and actually switching to, this is practice for cranial microsurgery. I'm getting better as a brain surgeon by learning how to become a master of spine surgery. And that turned me into a much better surgeon, a much more compassionate, thoughtful, careful surgeon. And now that's how I spend the bulk of my time. And I love it. I absolutely love the way I spend my time in minimally invasive spine surgery, because I realized what an impact I can have on an individual person's life. And that thought process, that mindset shift is what turned me into the Dr. Lee Warren that is there now in the world, taking care of people. And that came from Joe Maroon and Parvish Bagai and Jack Wilberger, Adnan Abla, and a dozen other guys that he put around me that turned me from this left-handed kid from Oklahoma to a highly regarded cranial and spinal microsurgeon that I am today. And I'm so grateful. And I just wanted to have this conversation with Joe so that you could see that there are places in your life where you can make the similar mindset shift and recognize whose shoulders you're standing on, all the way back to the fact that you have a great physician who ultimately is the designer and creator of everything, including your life. And you can take that idea and say, wait a minute, I need to stop feeling so frustrated all the time, because I'm actually the recipient of an incredible gift. I've got a mission and a purpose. I've got appropriate training. I'm getting some of it today with this podcast, and I can make a difference in somebody else's life if I learn how to change my mind and change my life. I'm so grateful for Dr. Maroon taking the time to be with us today. And I just want you to remember that no matter what you're facing, my friend, you can learn to biopsy your thought, change your perspective, recognize that there are multiple things to be grateful for here. Take the high ground of your own neurochemistry, and remember that you're standing on shoulders of those who came before you that enabled and empowered you to be here in this moment so that you can change your mind and you can change your life. And the good news is you can start today. Hey, thanks for listening. The Dr. Lee Warren podcast is brought to you by my brand new book, Hope is the First Dose. It's a treatment plan for recovering from trauma, tragedy, and other massive things. It's available everywhere books are sold, and I narrated the audiobooks. Hey, the theme music for the show is Get Up by my friend Tommy Walker, available for free at TommyWalkerMinistries.org. They are supplying worship resources for worshipers all over the world to worship the Most High God. And if you're interested in learning more, check out TommyWalkerMinistries.org. If you need prayer, go to the prayer wall at wleewarrenmd.com/prayer, wleewarrenmd.com/prayer, and go to my website and sign up for the newsletter, Self Brain Surgery, every Sunday since 2014, helping people in all 50 states and 60 plus countries around the world. I'm Dr. Lee Warren, and I'll talk to you soon. Remember, friend, you can't change your life until you change your mind. And the good news is you can start today.